Hello and welcome. My name is Tessa, and for the next 45 minutes I'll be offering a workshop using a therapeutic technique called the Emotional Freedom Technique, often referred to as EFT or tapping, for better quality sleep. So some of you might be familiar with this technique already, and for some of you it might be completely new. But not to worry, during the workshop today I will do a brief revisit of some of the techniques and procedures around EFT, and then more specifically how we can use this to encourage and develop and to support us all getting better quality sleep. A few things before we get started today. Just to say that for some of you, you might be watching this live through the Whole Health Project. If you are, welcome. If not, you might be watching it later because it will be available on the Facebook page, so welcome to you too. To let you know, actually right now at the time of filming this, it looks like where I live here on the Sunshine Coast, we might be getting a little bit of a storm rolling through. So if you hear some rumblings, we're just about to get some welcome rain. And also, because of our timing this afternoon, we might hear towards the end of the workshop today some little peeps from our cat, because when we finish up it's about his dinner time, so just in case you hear some little meows, that's what's going on there. And also, some of the material that I'll be covering today might be perhaps a little bit activating or maybe even a little triggering for some of us, and that's really normal. Just encourage you to notice some of the thoughts or feelings or sensations you might be experiencing, and to utilize some of those resources you might already have available to you in order to perhaps recenter or to just invite a bit more of a grounding sensation for yourself. So something that I'm thinking of as an example that can be useful is, say if you're sitting on a chair, you might take a moment to notice your feet in contact with the ground beneath you. Alternatively, if you find it helpful, perhaps casting your gaze around the room and noticing 5 things you can see, 5 things you can hear, and 5 things you can feel. Just to allow yourself a few moments just to reconnect and come back to center if you're noticing some activation of feelings or sensations. It's very normal. It can also be really useful to have a contact number of someone that you trust and feel safe with, that if something is coming up for you, that you can reach out and connect with someone, that you can just talk through some of what might be happening for yourself. So it's just really important that we look after ourselves and each other, especially at the moment. Okay. So just a little bit about me. I am a trauma-sensitive therapist, and I have been offering therapy to children, young people and adults for about over 14 years now. Clients that have accessed therapy with me have experienced a range of challenges, often experiencing chronic stress, anxious feelings, depression, and often associated with experiences of domestic and family violence or sexual assault and exploitation. In terms of my training, I have completed my level 1 and 2 EFT training with a wonderfully skilled and talented woman in Australia called Kadin. She is offering a lot of her trainings now online at the moment, so if you're interested in this technique, I would highly recommend her training. And I'm also a yoga teacher, so I also really enjoy elements of movement in terms of how we can nourish our minds and bodies for our health and well-being. In terms of EFT, I've used this personally and professionally. I found it really helpful because it's quite a gentle and simple practice, and it's a practice that that we can do at home, you know, on your own, which I found quite empowering actually. So I hope you find this useful too for yourself. But just to say as well that if this is an interest area for you, or if you'd like to explore some challenges for yourself a little further, I'd really encourage you to seek out a trained and skilled practitioner in this area if it is something that you think you would like to explore a little further. And one more thing before we start, you might notice that from time to time I might gaze downwards or to the side. I'm just doing that to keep an eye on our time, and I've also made a couple of notes on the side that I just want to make sure that we get to everything that we can within the 45 minutes. Okay, so today, as I said, I'm going to do a brief overview of intro to EFT, and we'll revisit the procedure of EFT, of how to use this therapeutic technique. And we'll explore in more detail how we can use EFT to work towards creating and developing better quality sleep. Okay, then we'll go through a sequence, so a practice sequence. Then we'll do a practice specifically related to encouraging better quality sleep. Then I'll try my best to make sure that there's some time at the end for just a little recap, or if any questions or comments have popped up as we go along. So if you are watching live, feel free to ask anything as we go, and I'll try my best to keep an eye on that. Okay. And just a little reminder for what you'll need today is a quiet space as much as possible for 45 minutes, and also a bit of an offering to yourself, one of self-compassion and non-judgment. So that's all you'll need for today. Okay, so just a brief little intro to what is this emotional freedom technique known as EFT. So the idea around EFT is that the emotional and the physical aren't separate, like what perhaps previously some time ago we used to believe or want to believe or used to believe in. You know, that when we experience situations like stress, for example, our bodies react automatically. You know, so if we're thinking about the example of stress, what we might notice is, for some people, our heart beats faster, our blood pressure might rise, we might start to sweat, our breathing changes, we might experience something in our stomach, you know, and we produce this stress hormone known as cortisol. Okay, so EFT can be a really useful and effective strategy for a range of emotional and physical experiences as well, such as reducing feelings of anxiousness or nervousness, reducing stress levels, managing things like chronic pain or discomfort, depression, perhaps healing past or present traumas. Also for sleep challenges, which is what we'll talk about today in more detail. It can also be useful for improving and increasing our self-esteem and managing a range of emotions. So EFT can be used for our emotional and physical experiences. So EFT is seen as this technique that combines Eastern meridian knowledge and Western psychology. So EFT comes from this belief that when we experience something like a stressful event, like I mentioned before, or a challenging moment, it can create something likened to a block in our energy system, which can then inhibit us from releasing that discomfort and create something like an imbalance or disharmony in our bodies. So with EFT, we do focus on the challenge that we're experiencing and what thoughts, feelings, or sensations or images we feel and where we might feel this discomfort in our bodies. We then tap, so just gently with our fingertips, we tap on specific meridian points, and just like the ones that are used, or similar to the ones that are used in acupuncture. And the idea is that this then clears or works towards clearing as much as possible those energy blocks that we have to that particular challenge. So EFT is seen as something similar to acupuncture, but without the needles. And I have shared before that that came as a big relief to me for someone that has a bit of a challenge around needles. And we use our fingertips to gently tap on pressure points. So it's sometimes been referred to as psychological or emotional acupuncture for that reason. So as with acupuncture, EFT stimulates various pressure points on the face and body and fingertips to relieve and decrease the intensity of what it is that you're working on, what that challenge is, which then often has a positive flow-on effect to other emotional or perhaps physical discomforts or challenges we might be experiencing. So then the idea is then once these blocks are cleared or have shifted, then what you might notice is a decrease in the intensity of those original feelings that you started with. So if you were to cast your mind back to the presenting challenge or issue, you might notice that you perhaps don't feel as activated as before. So things almost feel a little more manageable in that way. And in terms of some of the studies that have been carried out for EFT, there is a lot of research out there. There's a lot of really robust studies now that are accessible. And a lot of the studies have shown that there has been a reduction in our stress hormone that I mentioned earlier, called cortisol, in as little as one session of EFT, which I always find astounding, actually. So the idea here is that while practicing EFT, so while gently tapping on certain pressure points, we are sending signals to our brain that we no longer need to be in survival mode or in our sympathetic nervous system. That doesn't need to be activated. Our fight, flight, freeze, submit, or fawn response. So that may have been useful in keeping us emotionally or physically safe at some point in our lives, but that right now it might not be serving us as well or in the same way as if perhaps it had previously. So the idea as well around EFT is that it stimulates and activates our parasympathetic nervous system, so our rest, digest, repair and restore. And so just to recap there, so when our nervous system stays in this prolonged state of fear, being the sympathetic nervous system, related to that fight, flight, freeze, submit or fawn, it can then actually be hard for the nervous system to enter into that parasympathetic nervous system, being our rest, digest, repair and restore, long enough for deep quality sleep to occur. Okay, so that can have an impact on the quality of sleep that we are getting. Okay, so why EFT for sleep? Well, as I just mentioned, about activating our parasympathetic nervous system, which prepares us for restful, nourishing sleep. But many things can have an impact on us getting good, quality, restful restorative and nourishing sleep. And many of us are likely to be affected on an emotional and physical level, especially at the moment, in terms of what the world is experiencing and what we're then experiencing due to this situation. And this can fluctuate throughout the course of a day, but that ultimately can have an effect on our sleep. Okay, and then the flow and effect of us not getting adequate restful sleep for yourself can have an impact on not only the next day, but it can have an ongoing impact on our physical and emotional health and well-being. And so challenges with getting deep, restful sleep tend to be one of the most common symptoms that accompanies feelings and situations such as anxious feelings, stress, uncertainty, traumas, change in daily structure and routine, and overactive thoughts as well. So when we find our mind just being really busy and overstimulated. And so conversely, although our sleep can be affected through really challenging and sometimes distressing and stressful situations, it can also be impacted if we're feeling really overstimulated in terms of perhaps we have lots of ideas or things we'd like to do. So our sleep can be affected by a whole myriad of reasons. But with lack of quality sleep being such a common challenge, it is really helpful to build in particular practices that help our minds and bodies relax to be able to enter into deep quality sleep, especially since our quality of sleep and rest has such an impact on our quality of our emotional and physical health and well-being. Yeah. So some of these practices, so alongside the practice of EFT, which we will get to in a couple of minutes, some of the following might be really useful in terms of encouraging a supportive and nourishing space to prepare our minds and bodies for sleep, for the evening sleep. So some of these things can be really useful, as I say, alongside the practice of EFT, such as having a little look at your bedtime routine, for example, which will help us transition to sleep, that involving our internal and external environment. Okay, so that's a really important feature of our bedtime routine. Perhaps creating some gentle and nourishing movement in the evening while preparing for sleep. So some of that movement might be some really gentle stretches, maybe some breathing practices that you might be familiar with. I always find if you have a spare little bit of wall, having your legs up the wall can be really nourishing towards the end of a day. As much as possible, avoiding particular stimulants that you know has an impact on you. Taking a moment to have a look at our sleeping environment. You know, what do you find relaxing to have in your space? What's also really important and can be really useful is to take a few moments to acknowledge the day that has been so far. You know, what some of the positives have been, what some of those challenges have been, because both can keep us awake. And sometimes people find it useful to perhaps try writing some of this down before you complete your bedtime routine. So taking a few moments to really experiment with what is helpful for you to prepare your mind and body for sleep. Okay, so keeping that in mind, what I thought we might do is take a few moments to revisit the practice of EFT, because there is a little bit of a procedure to it. So I thought we might just do a little revisit of that before we do a practice specifically related to sleep. Okay, so feel free to join in with this. It's entirely up to you, but I'll talk us through it, and as I said, we'll revisit it in a moment when we do a practice on sleep. So the basic EFT procedure involves identifying the challenge. So what it is that you would like to work on. So for example, today we're going to be working on sleep, but it might be something else, and that might shift and change even throughout the procedure. But we name what the challenge is that we'd like to work on, and then we include emotions or feelings or sensations that you notice, and perhaps even where you notice it in your body. We then test or rate the intensity of these feelings or sensations. So for some people, if numbers is something that resonates with you, so for example, a scale of 0 to 10, 0 being non-existent, 10 being the most intense. Some people find it useful to use like little emotion faces, maybe shapes, the size of something, or colours. So whatever resonates with you in terms of testing out the intensity of the feeling that's present. Then we create something called a setup statement, which we repeat 3 times. If you forget to repeat it 3 times, that's okay too. But ideally we repeat it 3 times. And the goal of this setup statement is to acknowledge the challenge, so the challenge that you'd like to work on. And then that's quickly followed up with a statement of self-acceptance. Now that statement of self-acceptance can be something that a lot of people find quite difficult to come up with. Because an example of a statement of self-acceptance might be that I accept myself just as I am, or I respect and love myself as I am. Or for some people they might say, I will try to be okay. So whatever resonates with you, and this will make a little more sense when we go to do the full practice. Okay, so the setup statement is naming what the challenge is, and the more specific we can be, the more effective the technique ends up being. So we name the challenge, and then we always finish the setup statement with a statement of self-acceptance. Okay, so then we do the tapping sequence. Okay, so there are different techniques of doing this. I'll teach you the one that I was trained in, and I'll show you different variations of that. But the full sequence that I was taught in was to start at the top of your head. So we tap on the top of your head, we go to the inside of your eyebrows, then to the outside of your eyebrows, so around, pretty much around the temple, your temple, under your eye, under your nose, under your bottom lip, coming to the edge of your collarbone, and then we go to under your armpits. So I tend to cross my arms here, it's a little easier. So come to underneath your armpits, and then just feeling for the bottom of your ribs, tapping there. And then we come to the fingers, so starting with the edge of either thumb, either your right or left, tapping on the edge of your thumb, tapping on the edge of your index finger, middle finger, ring finger and little finger. Then we'd go to the other hand. Okay. Then once we've done that tapping sequence, we'll take a moment just to check in with where we're at, how we're feeling, and then we would re-rate how we're feeling. So checking in with that, if you were using a number, for example, you might have started with a 6 out of 10, and then you check in with the intensity of those feelings or sensations that might still be present, knowing that they might shift or change, or they might not. And so you can always go through another sequence, or perhaps that's enough for you today. Okay, so just a moment to check in. All right, so keeping all that in mind, should we do a practice? Okay, so let's have a look at how we incorporate EFT for getting better quality sleep. Couple of notes before we start. Ideally, if we can incorporate a tapping sequence while we're preparing for bed, so as part of our bedtime routine that we were talking about earlier, so the more regular that we tap, that helps to really quieten our minds and bodies before sleep. So then you're more likely to wake up feeling rested and energized for the day ahead. Okay, so like I mentioned before, as part of the bedtime routine, allowing some space to check in with the day that has been, and just checking in if there's anything that might still be present. It might be something that, like a certain situation that might have happened in the day, or a certain interaction, and we can take a moment to acknowledge this. But if anything comes up for you that feels a little activating in any way, even if you feel like, oh no, I've dealt with that situation or that interaction, but that sometimes that event can still activate us in a physical or emotional response, which then can in turn trigger our stress hormone production in our body. So ideally, if we notice that this is happening, so if we remember an interaction that happened in the day and we might feel our heart rate increase slightly, we can do a little tapping sequence on that. So it might have been, for example, so an interaction could have been, let's have a think. Maybe you were driving and, I don't know, someone felt like was driving a little unsafely around you, and you think back to that and you go, actually, yeah, that was just a really uncomfortable and scary interaction. Then you might start your setup statement with, even though I had this interaction in the car today and it makes me feel a little unsettled, I still accept myself just as I am. So you might go through that to start with before you even get to your tapping sequence for sleep. Because the idea behind that is to acknowledge that throughout the course of our day, lots of different things can have an impact on us. And that if we haven't allowed ourselves a few moments to process some of that, when we come to the time for preparing for sleep, when we allow maybe a couple of moments of quiet in our space, in our environment, that's when some of those experiences can come back consciously or otherwise, that then can have an impact on us falling asleep. Okay? So EFT, what I'm going to be going through this evening is using EFT as part of your bedtime routine before you go to sleep. So the idea is that it will help you fall asleep and hopefully stay asleep. If you're experiencing some challenges with staying asleep, so for example, if you're feeling like sleep is becoming a little restless or you're a little wakeful, you can also do an EFT process, but you might want to tweak it a little bit. So for some people, doing the full tapping sequence can almost kind of wake you up a little bit or be a little bit activating in a different way. So for some people, they might just apply some gentle pressure to the sides of their fingers as they're lying in bed. Or for some people, they can even imagine the tapping sequence instead of moving your arm through the sequence. Can be useful also. All right, so let's do a practice. Okay, just keeping an eye on our time as well. And don't forget, if you are watching this live, feel free to ask any questions as we go. So with this practice, as always, feel free to join in. I'll be talking specifically about sleep being a challenge. If at the moment, if sleep is not a challenge for you at all, please feel free to fill in the gaps to what feels true to you today. Okay, if there's something that you would like to work on, a small challenge or perhaps irritation or annoyance, feel free to fill in the gaps for yourself. Or alternatively, you don't need to use words at all. So you might not want to join in with the words that I'm using. feel free to just tap along without using any words. And the idea behind that is that your mind and body will have a felt sense of the tapping sequence. Okay? So before we get started on our practice, if you need to, have a sip of water, which I'm going to do. It's really important that we keep hydrated when we do these types of practices as well. Okay, so let's get started. So we'll create that setup statement that we'll repeat 3 times. Okay, and as I said, I'll talk us through it. Feel free to join in, or maybe just to tap along. Okay. So, and again, this is specific to do with sleep. All right. So even though it's time to sleep, but my mind is still busy, and my body feels tense, I feel it in my chest, it's about a 6 out of 10. I accept how I feel, and I still respect myself, just as I am. So we'll switch hands, so tapping on the edge. Sorry, I didn't say that before, did I? Tapping on the edge of your hand. We'll do that 2 more times. So even though it's time to sleep, but my mind is still busy, it's racing, my body feels tense, and I feel this in my chest, about a 6 out of 10. I'm not yet feeling ready for sleep, but I accept how I feel, and I accept and respect myself just as I am. So 1 more time, switching hands. Even though it's time to go to sleep, but my mind is still busy and racing from the day, and my body feels tense, I feel it in my chest, about a 6 out of 10. I'm not yet feeling ready for sleep, but I accept how I feel, and I still accept and respect myself just as I am. Okay, now we'll go through the tapping sequence, starting at the top of your head. It's time to go to sleep. And coming in between your eyebrows. My mind is still so busy. Coming to the ends of your eyebrows, around your temples. My mind is racing. Coming to under your eyes. My body feels tense. Under your nose. I feel this tension in my chest. Under your bottom lip. It's about a 6 out of 10. Coming to the start of your collarbones, just underneath there. I'm not yet feeling ready for sleep. Going to underneath your armpits, so crossing your arms if that's easier. It's time to go to sleep. Coming to the bottom of your ribs, but I'm not feeling ready for sleep yet. Coming to the edge of your thumb, either one, doesn't matter which one you start with. My body's feeling tense. I accept how I feel. To the next finger. My mind is still so busy. Next finger. I feel like my mind is racing. Coming to your little finger. I'm not yet ready for sleep. Changing hands. It's time to go to sleep. This tension in my body. Next finger. I feel it in my chest. Next finger. It's about a 6 out of 10. And little finger. My mind is still so busy. placing your hands down somewhere comfortable, taking a deep inhale through your nose, exhale through your mouth. Maybe moving or stretching if you need to, if that's useful for you. So now after you've gone through a sequence, we would then check in. So check in with some of those things we tapped on. So we'd have a think about, because I mentioned tension in my chest, and I rated that about a 6 out of 10. So now if I think about and feel into tension in my chest, I'd say it's about a 3.5 out of 10. So that's reduced for me. I've also noticed that often happens for me when I do an EFT practice is that my breathing has shifted and it's slowed down a little bit. So often that's a good indication that my parasympathetic nervous system has been activated. So because I've rated the tension in my body, particularly my chest, being about a 3.5 now out of 10, and I've named the challenge that I was wanting to work on, knowing that it was time to go to sleep, but my mind is still busy. It's feeling, I think I said it was racing, perhaps. I can't remember the word I used for that. Body feeling tense and not feeling ready yet for sleep. So if I was still experiencing some of that, if I was still a bit like, oh, my mind is just really overactive, it still feels like it's really busy, I might do a really specific sequence on that. So for example, if that's something that you have experienced, you might do something like, even though my mind is still racing, it's really busy, I've got all these thoughts swimming around in my mind. And you might have an image associated with that. So for me, it feels like something is kind of, spinning around my head. I still accept myself as I am. So even though my mind is still racing, it feels like my mind is full of all these thoughts. It's really busy. It's almost like I can see, it's like this yellow ring spinning around my head. I still accept myself as I am. You do it one more time, even though I still feel like my mind is really busy. There's lots of thoughts going round and round in my mind. It's almost like this, I can see this yellow ring spinning around my head. I still accept myself, just as I am. And then you would do a sequence. So again, as I mentioned before, for some people doing the full sequence can actually make you feel a little awake because it's the movement that's happening. So you're moving your arms, going under your arms, tapping. So have a bit of an experiment with what you find useful for you. So as part of your bedtime routine, instead of doing the full sequence, maybe you'd like to just tap on your fingers. Or as I said before, perhaps applying some very gentle pressure to each finger. Yeah. And I might have mentioned earlier as well that if you're someone that is slightly wakeful in the evening or during your sleep state, sometimes just imagining that you are doing the tapping sequence can be really beneficial. So for example, if you're lying there in bed and you've been asleep but you've woken up, and sometimes the reason for us waking up might be we've been having a bit of a restless sleep anyway, or perhaps we've woken up and straight away our minds become active. Imagining that you're doing the sequence, the tapping sequence, can be really beneficial. So just in your mind's eye, imagining tapping the top of your head, in between your eyebrows, eyes, under your eye, under your nose, under your bottom lip, collarbone. So just imagining this in your mind's eye, imagining this. And often by the time we've gone through the tapping sequence of imagining that, we're feeling quite sleepy again. Okay, so that's a strategy you can use. if you're wakeful in the evening once you've been off to sleep. Okay, so I'm just conscious of the time now. So just to recap, so EFT, the therapeutic technique of the emotional freedom technique, can be incredibly useful, beneficial, supportive, and helpful for encouraging better quality sleep. And now I'd offered this at this particular time, given what we're all experiencing, and all of us experiencing it in different ways, in different moments, feeling different emotions, thoughts, feelings, images, sensations, and that this hopefully is another resource to use to really look after yourself at the moment, and to look after each other, you know, and to get that quality sleep that we all really do benefit from on an emotional level and also physical level, you know, for us to feel ready for the next day ahead. So I really hope this has been useful for you. If you do have any questions, comments, if there's anything you'd like to share, please do feel free to share. Just a reminder as well that I have done some previous videos on using EFT. The one I did last week was using EFT and drawing. So please feel free to have a look at that if you'd find that useful or interesting. And I had also done the intro to EFT a couple of weeks ago, so feel free to have a little rewatch or watch of that. This time, next Sunday, so same time next week, I will be doing one more EFT 45-minute workshop for reducing the intensity of anxious feelings and stress. So please do tune in for that. If you're unable to make it to the live recording, that's absolutely fine. The videos will be accessible to you on the Whole Health Project Facebook page. And if it's possible for you at the moment to offer a small donation, if you found this useful today, there is a little link to my PayPal on the description of this video. If it's not possible for you at the moment, please don't worry. I would rather you take this away as a helpful resource and see this as a bit of a gift from me to you. So again, I hope you have found this workshop helpful, and I hope that we can all get the wonderfully restful, nourishing quality sleep that we all need and deserve and can benefit from. So thank you again for tuning in. Take care, and I'll hopefully see you all next Sunday. So thank you very much. Thank you.